And one. Right, guys, welcome back to the Adam Computer Fitness Podcast. Today on the show, I have Stan Efferding. Any of you guys who are currently following the show, you probably already know who Stan is. But Stan is the founder of the Vertical Diet. He also is a record-setting powerlifter and bodybuilder, and just has a ton of accolades. He's worked with tons of elite athletes too, as an elite athlete himself, and he has just a lot of knowledge. I think that lots of people can benefit from. So it's a big treat to have him on the show. So thank you so much for coming on, Stan.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Cool. So I wanted to get into first things first with you being an elite athlete, and lots of elite athletes seek you out to help really fine tune the details of their plans. I wanted to ask, who's like, do you feel like you have a little bit of an advantage having had that experience competing at the highest levels, where you can relate to these athletes? Like, how do you think that that has impacted your ability to coach people?
Yeah, it's huge. I've always said if I knew then what I know now, I had an opportunity to make a lot of mistakes throughout my career and work with a lot of great coaches, and then kind of bounce that up against all the current science. As you know, the co-author of the Vertical Diet is a PhD RDN who was director of dietetics at UNLV and a professor in the exercise phys department. And we've spent the better part of the last 5 years and hundreds of hours together, just making sure that the information we provide is accurate. And it's important that we get the proper science behind it. But like you said, experience counts for a lot. And I can see when athletes are struggling, I might have some simple solutions. A lot of the guys I've worked with were already great athletes. John Jones was already the kind of the GOAT of MMA prior to my ever meeting him. Hafthor Bjornsson, Mitchell Hooper was already world's strongest man before I started working with him. The same with, a lot of the great athletes that I've worked with over the years. Lane Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles was already an all-pro offensive lineman. But behind the scenes, a lot of what athletes do to get there might not always be the easiest path. I often say sometimes they're successful in spite of themselves, and they do a lot of things that aren't necessarily beneficial, and in some cases may even be detrimental. And so a lot of what I do, to kind of boil it down, is to make things easier on them behind the scenes. Just make them feel better, make them healthier. You've heard me say that health and fitness are not the same thing. Health is the absence of illness or injury. Of course, show me someone who's never been injured, I'll show you someone who's never won anything. And then fitness is the ability to perform a particular duty or task. And the fitness level required to be any of those athletes I just mentioned is not necessarily healthy. And we'll do whatever it takes to reach our goals, regardless of our health. So a lot of the things that I do is to help them minimize injury, mitigate risk, both short-term and long-term in terms of their general health, and then just to make it easier, make sleep easier, make eating the foods that they need to eat easier, and so that they have less stress, more time to focus on their training.
So in regards to making those things easier, what are some of the biggest things that you've seen that lots of these elite athletes are doing well versus things that they are sort of missing the details on?
Well, the great athletes, they're consistent, they're disciplined, and they train very hard. There's no question that that's the foundation of, and they're obviously, genetics reigns supreme. There's no question that that's the foundation. The things that they generally don't do well, the larger athletes probably suffer from some degree of sleep apnea, and so they're not getting the quality of sleep that they need to recover and to feel great. And so we work, obviously first and foremost as the foundation upon which everything else sits. We work on sleep, and that might mean getting a CPAP for all the large athletes that I mentioned. Once you get north of 250, 260, certainly, and if you're doing resistance training, you're going to have a thick neck and some obstruction of the airway, and it's going to be difficult for you to sleep without some interruption of your breathing. And so that's the big one, is sleep, and then good sleep hygiene, just making sure they're real consistent with all the things that lead to a better night's sleep: cool room, quiet room, dark room, waking up at the same time every morning, getting exposed to light, staying away from blue lights, all those things that we kind of know, but we don't necessarily do consistently. So I track sleep. We'll use a Whoop or some sort of tracker to make sure that we are looking at hours, and hopefully the accuracy isn't always perfect, but some measurement of REM and stage 4 deep sleep. And we want to make sure that those are improving, or those are metrics at least that we track. And that can be a good way for us to judge fatigue. If they come to the gym and they're not performing very well, and I can look back and see that their sleep hasn't been very good over the last few days or week, then we can chalk that up to that and try and make some changes in that area. The next thing I think is that a lot of athletes will subject themselves to unnecessary amount of fatigue. We see it like with distance runners putting in too many hard miles as opposed to doing less frequent, more intense training, and then more frequently doing the GPP, general physical preparedness. Now with athletes like fighters, we don't want to be accumulating a lot of fatigue in the gym. I don't want them doing a ton of heavy axial loading. It's going to wear heavy on their central nervous system, and they're not going to be able to recover. And they get into their boxing or wrestling, and it's just too much fatigue. Same with football. We got to be careful that what we do in the gym doesn't accumulate unnecessary stress, because their sport is not in the gym. Power lifters, I might push their CNS a little harder and a little heavier, but by the same token, I want them to do plenty of lower fatigue stuff. And I'll make some quick examples of that. High fatigue movements, obviously axial loading, squat, and deadlift. And the heavier the loads, obviously the more central nervous system fatigue you're going to accumulate, longer it's going to take to recover, more DOMs, etc. And so I can build a significant amount of strength, maybe doing a belt squat. I can get the same force production for the legs without all the axial loading. I can do a chest supported row or lat pull down and get lots of back movement without all of the spinal loading that you might get from, say, a bent row or a deadlift. We can do hip extension exercises that don't require, it could be just a hip thrust or something like that, or even a glute kickback in terms of the ability to get good hip extension and drive for sprinting that doesn't include axial loading, as would, say, an RDL or, again, a deadlift, those kinds of things. So I'm trying to reduce fatigue in the gym. I don't want to put too much stress on the athlete. And the frequency also, frequency and volume. In terms of strength, I don't need to get as close to failure. I can say if you're lifting, strength is specific. You do need to be at over 70%, probably over 85% of your 1 rep max to really be talking about the central nervous system stimulus for strength and for force production. But that doesn't necessarily mean you need to grind reps. And so if you do an 85% load that you might typically be able to do for 5 repetitions, you might only do 3 fast reps and leave the other 2 in the tank and come back and do a few more of those. And that would be sufficient. I wouldn't have to add on a second multi-joint high fatigue strength movement to that. I could go on to something else. And I would definitely, for all athletes, want to incorporate some speed. And my preferences for speed are things that have short ground contact time and very explosive stuff. It might be dumbbell jumps, it might be box jumps, it would certainly be overspeed treadmill sprinting, and then pogo jumps where you'd use a band assist hanging from a chin-up bar to support some of your weight, and then just do basically you're doing just pogo jumps or kind of like jump roping, but with a band assist. So very short ground contact time. You have to be careful when you're talking about speed that it's actually fast, and you don't want to have a whole lot of ground contact time. So that probably covers most of what I try and do. And then the GPP, things like dragging sleds, doing recumbent bike work, those kinds of things are very low fatigue, but still allow you to accumulate plenty of zone 2, zone 3 work that gives you a good cardiovascular base.
Yeah, I like how, a lot of this is just like talking about, number one, like actually understanding what is our needs of your athlete, what are their sports needs, and then what are their limitations, because really the job of the coach, like you said, in your view, is to make this training easier, make the ability to actually improve easier, and make sure that we are actually training in a way that's going to maximize that stimulus to fatigue ratio. Because one of the things I always tell people that follow me is, like, nobody cares about how hard you're working if you're not getting better. And you can work really, really, really hard and get absolutely nowhere. And I think that the more that you understand, it's about cutting the crap that's not actually, going to be contributing to your progress and maximizing what's actually going to give you those results. And, you don't talk about anything that's super groundbreaking, but I don't think really any coach does that is actually worth their salt. Any of these fads and gimmicks, things that seem overly complicated, they're usually, to make you want to keep buying their supplement, keep coming back to you for more. And the reality is like it's just about simplifying things and looking at, well, if your athlete feels overly fatigued, well, they're really big. Well, how's your sleep? Have you ever looked into that? The answer is probably not. They probably never thought about that. I also think that for you, there's a degree of respect that needs to be had with the coach. And one of the things I wanted to get at with what I was going with that earlier is that with your accolades and everything that you've done, it's extremely easy for a high-level athlete to trust you because they respect you a little bit more because you've been where they are at. You know what they're feeling, and that ability to like empathize with your clients is a big thing. You don't need to be a Division I, football player to coach Division I athletes in a weight room. But if you have been, it's definitely going to give you a little bit of an edge with motivating, inspiring, helping keep them accountable, knowing how to talk to them, etc.
Yeah, you said something very important there, that everything should yield some sort of benefit. You see a return on your investment, and I just say it should be measurable and progressible. And if you can't measure it, then you really don't know if it's improving, and you should be able to progress it over time. And that would pertain to speed, it would pertain to strength, and it would pertain to cardiovascular fitness. All of those things can be measured and progressed over time. So that's very important with athletes.
Yeah, I think also just like, I found that for most of my clients that are really good, they like measuring the small details. They like tracking their sleep. They like tracking their macros and their steps. And like it can be neurotic and whatever, but I feel like in order to get the best outcomes, like that is necessary. Like you need to be aware of all these tiny details and how they're impacting your performance. Because I can literally go back on my training and like I had a really terrible like week 2, and I'm in like meet prep right now, and I'm like, oh no, like, and do I need to pull out of this meet because I'm not going to be peaked? And then I look back at all my data, and I'm like, in my videos, I'm like, week 2 always sucks. Like this
Yeah.
is par for the course, and so it's like it's something you can hold fast to when things are not linear, because that's the nature of progress too. It's not linear, and especially as you get more and more advanced. And I'm sure that part of your job as a coach is like, sort of with your athletes, because you work with people of all sort of sport demands. You're not going to have maximal progress all the time. How do you help your athletes actually come to grips with that and then work through those periods, and maybe even like periodize training and effort to just really maximize their outcomes? Like progress is fatiguing too. There needs to be periods of where you're not making progress to potentiate that future progress.
Yeah, well, one of the ways I do that is that not everything has to be the same PR. You can do single rep maxes, you can do 3 rep maxes, you can do 10 rep maxes, you can do chains or bands. I usually try and help them end on a win, but you're right, it kind of oscillates. One of the better ways, we used to measure fatigue by getting up and checking your resting heart rate in the morning. If it was significantly elevated, we'd know we'd overtrained. Well, that's a lagging indicator. You've already kind of overtrained. And I don't want to suggest that a little bit of overtraining is necessarily a negative thing, but accumulating too much overtraining over time, could obviously impair performance. But that would tell you maybe to back off a little bit, maybe take a day off or go a little easier. But what we're doing now is what we see a lot with some of the great trainers, Mike Tashir and others. We're measuring bar speed. And if, let's just say, for instance, if you move a heavier weight slower, did you get stronger? And that's always the question.
Right.
And so if we measure bar speed, this helps us because if we go into a particular workout with a plan, which we usually have some general guidelines as to what we'd like to achieve, and you get up to say, your second to top set, and things are moving really slow, then you probably shouldn't try your top set, or maybe even you should wait until you're at peak performance and just call that a day. As soon as your speed comes down, you don't necessarily want to add extra weight and accumulate a significant amount of fatigue when your body just isn't prepared to perform and set a PR. And PRs can be 1 rep, PRs can be 5 pounds. But if you try and do too much too fast, you're going to end up accumulating kind of a deficit. You have to provide a sufficient stimulus. You have to recover from and super compensate for that stimulus so that you can continue to progress. But just tearing yourself down and building yourself back up without the super compensation that's not a road to progress. You don't get any better that way. And so bar speed is usually what I like to do. If I pull, and we tend to know, about how easily or how hard or how easy a weight's moving as an experienced lifter. And if it's really hard before you get to your top 2 sets, you might just call it a day. Yesterday was an example of that. I just expected, I've lost a lot of weight recently. I've dropped 17 pounds, 7% of my body weight. I recommend that to most of my athletes, especially the big athletes in the off season, to help with obviously a lot of health issues, NAFLD, blood sugar control, et cetera, blood pressure. I don't want people to stay heavy all year round. We talked about periodization, you just mentioned in terms of your loading, but there also, for my heavy athletes, linemen, the strongmen, the power lifter, I like them to drop some weight in the off season, periodize their body weight as well in order to maintain optimal health. And 7% seems to be a really good number for resolving a vast majority of NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is kind of a precursor to all those other things, high blood sugar, high blood pressure, et cetera. And so I dropped 7% recently. In the first, say, 40 days, I dropped the bulk of the weight. I lost a significant amount of strength, particularly in my bench press. That obviously, that kind of goes up and down with weight. But even my squat was effective. Some of it might be mechanics. But then I held that weight. This kind of goes to plateaus. I held that body weight for an extended period of time, well over 30 days. And this is what I recommend to my weight class fighters, such as wrestlers and martial arts fighters, et cetera, is that they lose most of their weight up until about 30 days before weigh-ins. At 30 days before weigh-ins, I want you to be at your pre-water cut weight, meaning I want you at the same weight all the way up until about 4 days before you actually do your water cut for a full 30 days. I don't want you losing weight the last 3+ weeks going to a water cut, because you'll continue to lose strength. But if you lose your weight, if you start a little earlier and lose your weight so that 30 days out, you're at pre-water cut weight, you'll gain strength back. And that's what I did over the last 30 days. I was struggling with, say, 500 on the box squat for a triple when I used to do it easily for 5s, and I had done a 600 for a triple. So yesterday I went to the gym, and I'm pretty lightweight. I'm down 17 pounds, and I didn't know what was going to happen, because the previous squat session was pretty hard. The weights were moving slow, and they felt heavy. I got to 405, and it exploded. So I went up to 500. And it actually moved pretty quick. And so I went to 550 or 545, totally unexpectedly. I didn't plan it to be there. But I take what my body gives me. I don't always, whether that means I have to stop early or I take advantage of being strong that day. And yesterday I was strong. And so I was knocking out triples with 545, and it was moving faster than the 500 had moved a month prior. And I was at the same body weight. And so part of that is that when you're cutting weight, you're in a calorie deficit. And then when you reach your goal weight, or your 30-day pre-water cut weight, and when you reach your goal weight, you can add back in some calories to maintain that weight. So you're getting an extra 400+ calories, which are usually almost all carbs at that point. And I was sleeping a little better. I was a little more full with glycogen retention and water. And the speed was going well, but this is exactly how I train my athletes. I listen to them, have that feel, where we check bar speed, and we'll take what our body gives us. And if we set a PR, we're done for the day. If we set a PR, we're done for the day. There's no reason to set a second PR or go to another exercise and shoot for another PR. When you set a PR, you're done for the day. That, you've done everything you can do. Rest, come back, and continue to grow that.
I think one important thing too with that concept of bar speed is the concept of ability PRs. So hitting a certain weight at a lower RPE or a higher bar speed, that is a huge marker of progress, and that's low fatigue too. And you really don't need to redline your body to get stronger. There are going to be times you need to push your limits, but Sprint is a very unique adaptation where like it's so dependent on that bar speed. And we know from the research right now, there's certain velocity loss thresholds where you're actually seeing that the stimulus to fatigue ratio is going to get skewed more in the ratio of the fatigue. And now there probably are times like when you're peaking where that peak intensity is prioritized for maybe make more sense, but that's because you're peaking. You're not building in that phase. You're trying to express your strength for a very specific day. I think one other thing that you said there too about like you, as you've gotten older and more experienced, you're less attached to like a certain number. And one of the things I made a post about this yesterday on my feed about like how I like moving my athletes farther away from like those RPE percent charts because like they can be a great guideline when you're starting off, but like as you get to be more experienced, like you're gonna know how the weight's supposed to feel based on where you're at in your training. It's like how slow is this supposed to be? How heavy is this supposed to be? And if you're more aware of that, you listen to your body and you have like certain warm up like routine where you take the same weights, you know how they move. You can tell am I having a good day or am I having a bad day? And I also think that you know, to see a little bit more okay with like fluctuations in strength and understanding, hey, I'm just trying to like just get a productive stimulus because the next time I want to get stronger. One of the worst things that can happen is if you're like trying to force that number, you're not, you might, you know, maybe you'll come back better than the next week, but more often than not, you're probably not. And you're going to need a deload in that scenario or an extended fatigue management period, and that you kind of disrupt that training momentum. His progress is really all about, in my opinion, like those small wins, creating that momentum and finding ways to keep that momentum around and managing that fatigue as you do make progress.
Yeah, agreed. I think we should make the distinction. Strength and hypertrophy optimally should be trained a little bit differently. Obviously, if you're training heavy, you can get bigger. And if you're training sufficiently to provide a hypertrophy response, you're going to get stronger because you're going to progress the loads over time. But we're talking about the 1%, those people who are focused mostly on strength. And that could be powerlifters, but could also be football players and strongmen, is the people that need good force production to better perform in their sport. And so we already mentioned that with strength, I don't like to grind as much. I definitely need to be in the 85% plus range to optimize the strength. But that might be a 5-rep max, but I'll only do 3. Now with hypertrophy, I don't necessarily, I can create less fatigue by being, I don't hate to call it a bodybuilding range, because we know that you can build a similar amount of muscle in the 5-rep range as you can in the 30-rep range, as long as you have significant or sufficient effort, meaning within a rep or two of failure. But in bodybuilding, I like to do the bulk of my work in that 8 to 15 reps, a little less fatiguing overall. There's less load. The 20 plus reps is actually pretty high fatigue also. So I stay in that old bro bodybuilding range, 8 to 15, mostly for the stimulus to fatigue ratio, but I can take those reps closer to failure. In both circumstances, bodybuilding and powerlifting, I want a significant rest. I want to be at least, I'm thinking north of 3 minutes. I mean, unless you're talking about doing a tricep or a bicep or a calf exercise, you can shorten that up. But for any of the big movements, you're going to want to be at least north of 3. Sometimes I'm north of 5 minutes if it's a heavy squat. And there's a number of reasons for that. As we know, there's different things in the body that deplete substrates. Central nervous system gets taxed, and it takes you a few minutes or more to recover from that stimulus. Your creatine phosphate stores obviously will be depleted from those repetitions, and those need to clear. You know, you get the hydrogen ion clearance, and then some of it might also be just cardiovascular fitness. You don't want oxygen debt or lactate buildup or hydrogen ion buildup to be the limiting factor. You want all of that to be cleared, and to have your lungs and to have your central nervous system all refreshed. And we see in the literature as well, you look at Schoenfeld's work when you compare 1 minute rest to 3 minute rest for hypertrophy and strength, you see the 3 minute rest group always outperforming the 1 minute rest group. So don't hurry the workouts. In terms of time savings, I've often done kind of supersetted a push-pull where I'll do a chest exercise, rest a minute, do a back exercise. And that doesn't necessarily help you, even though you're working antagonistic muscle groups. That doesn't necessarily help you with CNS recovery. It doesn't help you with hydrogen ion clearance. We call the burn, the pump. And so you may see you will most certainly see a decrement in performance that wouldn't be optimal. But in the interest of saving time for the general population who are busy folks and want to get it all in, that's fine. But if we're talking about athletes, take the rest and try and beat the previous number. If you see a precipitous decline in repetitions, say you're doing dips and you can do 12 on your first set and the second set's 9 and the third set's 5, you're probably going too fast. You want to rest longer, maybe get 12, 11, 10 or 12, 12, 11, you know, whatever it takes to try and stay somewhere in that top range. Otherwise, the limiting factor again becomes something other than strength. And that's what we want to kind of avoid, because that's what we're training in the gym.
I think one thing too about like, you know, you mentioned like the practicality of like certain like rep ranges. I found it's really hard for people to gauge like proximity to failure, especially when reps do get above like 15, because like you start getting more of those hydrogen ion flux and you're starting getting them, you know, up into the acid blood. You're like, oh, like your body's like, oh shit, let's stop. Whereas like you can actually like the mechanical sensors and whatnot, you can actually get that mechanical tension stimulus, which is number one for most muscle growth, a lot more clearly defined with lower reps. You know, that 8 to 15 rep range, and I like that rep range too, because you know on single joint exercises, you know, maybe go closer to like 15 because you know your elbows like that a little bit more. Maybe closer to like an 8 on like, you know, an incline dumbbell press or something like that. As far as that vein though, is, you know, we know that muscle growth is very, very, very important for long-term strength. You know, and all else being equal, a bigger muscle has more potential to be a stronger muscle. As far as exercise structuring and sequencing, do you prefer doing like, if you have like somebody who's a powerlifter, like myself, who's skinny, trying to get, you know, bigger, if I want to build muscle as well as strength, do you like sort of separating sessions into maybe like this, like a strength focused workout, or do you like doing like maybe like strength work like before and then doing like some bodybuilding work after it? How do you prefer to structure training for powerlifters who, you know, want to get more muscular and also stronger?
I do a little bit of both. I do like to finish strength workout with some accessory work, and I don't like to do strength. The stronger I got, the less frequent I was able to perform those big powerlifting movements and get ample recovery. I think Eddie Hall did a clip on this on Instagram recently where he talked about how he plateaued for 2 years. So he was trying to go in every week and pull heavy. Well, Eddie Hall's heavy and, you know, a beginner or intermediate lifter's heavy are two completely different things. And if you're deadlifting 315 and that's heavy to you, that's great, you know, bang away. But when you're pulling 800 every week or more, it's a very different animal on the body. And so I think that you're going to need significantly more rest. When I was training with Mark Bell, when I was 40 back in 2009 and 10 and 11, right in there, I would squat heavy one week, deadlift heavy the next. So I was squatting heavy twice a month and deadlifting heavy twice a month. Well, that's not enough volume. And so I had to do accessory work after the squat. And then I would have to do, you know, things like belt squats and leg extensions and maybe single leg presses or lunges. You know, I would do some hypertrophy stuff on the alternate weeks because I wasn't squatting that, you know, but every other week. And that allowed me to get the volume that was necessary, certainly the GPP, and so I could maintain my muscle size. Having said that, I was always bigger when I was, in terms of just measuring, you know, the circumference of a muscle when I was bodybuilding than when I was powerlifting, even though I was heavier when I was powerlifting. Example of this I've always given is when I was training with Flex Wheeler, we didn't do any squats or deadlifts, none, zero. Everything was leg press, hack squat, leg extension, walking lunges. And it was higher repetitions, 15s plus rep range, a little shorter rest periods, maybe at 2 minutes instead of 5. And more volume, maybe 16 sets instead of 6. When I'm powerlifting, I probably only do 6 top sets, if that, you know, for a given body part in a single workout. And bodybuilding, we would gradually work up to more sets. And the hypertrophy training, I always had more volume in the muscles, and I would compete in bodybuilding at a pretty light weight, and then I would start bulking back up and jamming down the calories, but I would decrease my volume, increase my rest periods, decrease my frequency, vastly increase the loads that I was going under, and reduce the total repetitions per set. and I would actually lose an inch on my legs and get significantly stronger. And so it's always important to remember that particularly for athletes, that there's a strength to weight ratio that needs to be respected. You don't want to carry around a bunch of unnecessary muscle tissue that's going to utilize a lot of oxygen and possibly slow you down or make you unable to meet your weight class. But you can maintain your strength. That's pretty easy to do with, like we talked about, the heavier loads, the fewer repetitions. So, I mean, it's important to make those distinctions and understand that they can be two totally different things, and that you have to respect what your ultimate goal is, and not try and just put on a bunch of unnecessary weight.
So I guess a question with that, you mentioned like you were like an inch bigger. Would you think that's mostly related to like, were you eating more when you were bodybuilding, or maybe that was just like more sarcoplasmic hypertrophy with like having like higher levels of inflammation? Like what do you think caused that?
I would suggest both. Plus, I'm doing more single rep maxes. I wasn't doing a lot of fives.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Now I'm way down into ones and twos, as opposed to we mentioned that you can gain the same amount of hypertrophy from a set of 5 as you can from a set of 30, as long as your effort is sufficient. But now I'm doing singles and doubles, and so I have to try and throw in some. And again, as mentioned, not enough volume, and so I do throw in some accessory work post workout, and then in between workouts, I guess, to repeat the answer to the original question, is that I alternate. I'll do a powerlifting workout followed by a brief accessory lift, and then the next workout will be almost exclusively hypertrophy workout. I'll alternate them like that.
That makes a lot of good sense, because one of the things I've noticed, like after a heavy squat, it's like I've tried doing like really heavy like half squats or whatever like that, and like I just eventually I'm just not there, and that makes sense with the more of the nervous system disruption. Yeah. But like if I do like a lighter leg extension or like single lift movement, not only do I like recover better from that workout, actually adapt and get bigger and stronger, I can come into that next workout and I can want to push that other quality a little bit more, as opposed to if I just empty the tank all on that one day. Because like what you said earlier, like training is about coming back and being better. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people that are sort of type A, like myself, and from I gather you, like you always want to be doing more and more and more, and getting that mindset of like Jared Feather, when I was in Vegas and training with him, like he told me like a quote was like, good athletes do what they must, not what they want. And that's the biggest distinction between like the amateur and the professional.
Yeah. I should also throw this in there. Speed is very important. And the one of the biggest things you can do to hinder speed, obviously, is get older. It's one of the first things you lose is your speed. But number 2 is grinding too many reps. You gotta be careful about that. We talked about powerlifting. You want to leave a couple reps in the tank. You want to move heavy weights fast, for the platform in particular. And I would say the same thing would go for, say, a football player, et cetera. When I'm bodybuilding, they're doing accessory work, as we just discussed. I still want to move the weights pretty quick if I'm an athlete. If I'm a bodybuilder, different story. And so I think it's important that you maintain some speed work. We usually do that in warm-ups. We'll do a couple of things. Box jumps is a good one. Jump up, step down. I didn't mention that earlier when we were talking about some of these, the speed training that I do. I'm careful with the eccentric landing forces. You see this, like Ryan Krauser does a lot of explosive work, but he doesn't do the landing. He'll do the jumping, but not a lot of the landing. Examples of that, again, is to jump up on the box but step down. Another example of that would be, say, at the stadiums where they have those, they do the bounding, but they'll bound up onto and then repeatedly bound up the stadium. So their landing forces are greatly reduced. Also, when he's doing broad jumps, he jumps into a giant mattress as opposed to the landing portion. So he's trying to minimize as much as possible a lot of the eccentric braking forces. I would say the same thing with sprinting. You go out in a sprint, there's a lot of eccentric braking force involved with that. Once you get past, say, 20 meters, almost everything is a landing force at that point for most athletes. That's why I like the overspeed treadmill, because it's almost all concentric posterior chain work, and then you jump off. You grab the handlebars and step off to the side of it. All of those things reduce fatigue for speed. So like you mentioned, when I was working with JQB, we would warm up with some speed work, whether that was some really fast plyo push-ups for chest or med ball stuff, whether it slams down or throws up or just against the wall as fast as you can go. You know, contact time is explosive, or the pogos or the box jumps. I like the assault bike. I would do 10 seconds as fast as I could go. Really helps warm up my hips and my knees so I can go drop under a squat without any pain. You know, if you're in there doing, say, you know, rolling on a roller or something, on a foam roller, or you're just doing some mobility work, etc., not very explosive. And you want to get some speed, some very specific speed work in as a strength athlete in any sport. And then you can do your heavy lifting right after that.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that for myself, like, you know, and more I can like warm up like faster too. Like I'm actually like under the bar. So I think one of the biggest mistakes powerlifters will also make is like, oh, this is only like 45 pounds versus like 135. And they don't try moving it like it's, you know, like it's their max. And you're teaching your nervous system to produce force more slowly. And I do think like it's a really good point that you made about like how like with bodybuilding, like it's totally fine to like start grinding a little more and, you know, trying to like I don't, you always want to be trying to move as fast as possible. You know, that's going to produce like the most force, maximize the stimulus to fatigue ratio, and that's really what we're after.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess just to finish things off, I wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, how to overcome plateaus of like muscle gain, because I think that as you start getting larger, in particular, you know, we all had our good, you know, first 2 years of training, but most people don't make gains past their gain phase. What are some of the biggest things that you think that people can do if they're having some issues gaining mass with their training, diet, etc.?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the big things to understand is that you'll never get your newbie gains over again. You know, your first year of training, you're going to make a significant amount of progress. Your second year, half that. Your third year, half that. Your fourth year, half that. It's going to continue to decline. It just becomes harder and harder for you to gain the mass. Secondly, I think a lot of people, the mistake they make is they bulk up and then diet down, and they don't maintain those gains long enough. And when they were bulking, they might have added more fat than they should have. And when they were dieting, they might lose more muscle than they should have because they were trying to go too fast on both ends and not hold the middle long enough. And so I think it's important in terms of bulking. Obviously, you want to maintain a calorie surplus, but it should be a smaller surplus. It shouldn't be 1,000. It should be 500. And this is going to vary based on your training age and experience and your current body fat levels. You know, heavier people should have a smaller surplus, if any. And ectomorph skinny people should probably have a larger surplus. And then your training age, your experience level is going to dictate, you know, how much muscle you're going to be able to gain in what period of time. So obviously newbies are going to gain more muscle. So it becomes important that you consistently maintain a calorie surplus, not Thursday and Friday, or, you know, one meal was huge and the next meal, you know, don't eat again for 7 hours because you're full. It's very important that you consistently maintain that surplus. International Society of Sports Nutrition recommends about 4 evenly spaced feedings a day, getting about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. And again, that would vary based on your current body fat level. You could call it lean weight or goal weight if you're overweight. And then to be in that small calorie surplus, the food's the big thing, the sleep's the big thing. Being cautious with energy expenditure is another thing. If you're running around trying to pick up basketball and et cetera, it's not to say that you shouldn't do some cardio to support your training. But we used to believe, of course, back when I was bulking in the late 80s and early 90s, that don't run if you can walk, don't stand if you can sit, and don't stay awake if you can sleep. That was the motto, and you just ate as much as you possibly could shovel in your face. And I got fat doing that a couple of times. I got over 300 pounds, and it wasn't pretty. So and it's cautious there. Also, I'll throw this one out there in terms of, you know, we just talked about calories and we talked about macros, you know, obviously protein being key. Hitting on fats in particular, and I talked earlier about NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And when you're in a calorie surplus and you start to gain weight, and some of that weight will be fat, and at some point, if it's too much fat, you're going to want to do a little mini cut and lose some fat. But In the meantime, if you want to accelerate, if you want to prevent liver fat from accumulating, you want to reduce or minimize liver fat, the rate at which liver fat accumulates, which has all those downstream effects of insulin resistance and high blood pressure, et cetera. You want to reduce saturated fats in particular. When you compare isocaloric amounts, meaning the same amount of calories consumed in excess of saturated fat versus carbohydrates, saturated fats causes a progression of NAFLD at twice the rate of carbohydrates. And so I am particular about what the macros are and the specific food types. And so I'm cautious with saturated fats when I'm bulking in particular, and I lean more on carbohydrates. And for a second reason, obviously carbohydrates help performance, but carbohydrates also have an opportunity to be utilized as glycogen and stored in the muscles and the liver. And I maximize that process by training twice a day and taking 10-minute walks after meals. And I'm constantly trying to shuttle those carbohydrates into the muscle, which the muscles will absorb glucose from the bloodstream in the absence of need of insulin, so it won't have those adverse effects on health. So that's where I'm at, a lower fat, certainly a sufficient amount of protein. I don't think that you need more than 1 gram per pound, 1.2 at the most. But even then, in a calorie surplus, you benefit from protein sparing, plus the carbohydrates that are in there. So, and protein causes a lot of satiety, and it has that thermic effect of food. We're only netting out about 70 calories out of every 100 you eat. And so it's not the best weight gain food. And so I might cut that down to 0.8 or 0.7 grams per pound for a bulker. That's what I did with, Hawthorne and Mitchell Hooper. I brought their fats down, and their proteins down a little bit, dramatically reduced their saturated fats, hugely increased their carbohydrates, and threw in a ton of lean dairy. I think you might have seen Stu Phillips' report recently from McMaster University, talking about how dairy has a superior benefit. That's a dairy effect, both on BMI and on performance, even when compared to an equivalent amount of protein from another source. And we may or may not speculate about the mechanism of action being IGF-1 stimulation, but we do know in the outcome trials, regardless of why it happens, that it happens. And so for those people who can tolerate it, I try and get them to eat as much dairy as possible. We remember the old GOMAD, gallon of milk a day. And it was usually whole milk, and that would get you like 2,500 calories in a day. And it's a little easier to drink calories when you're trying to bulk. But I don't do the high fat milk. I actually do fat-free Greek yogurt. And I try and get, leaner sources or less fattier sources of carbs and keep the saturated fat low. So that's huge. And then having that mindset that it's going to take longer than you think, and you have to be really persistent. And sometimes you got to take a breather and not force feed yourself for 3 or 4 weeks. It might be part of, say, deloading, when you feel like you're training too hard and you need to just take a rest and kind of go on cruise control. Same thing could be true for eating. If it becomes, we kind of kicked off the conversation about making things easier on my athletes. Brian Shaw called me after about 2 weeks on my diet when I started working with him, and he said, "Stan, I'm hungry. I haven't been hungry in years." And that was just because I designed a diet that was a little easier to consume. Lane Johnson from the Eagles was having a hell of a time gaining weight. His registered dietitian, not an indictment on registered dietitians, had obviously never bulked before, had given him a diet that was packed full of a boneless, skinless chicken breast and 5 cups of quinoa a day. Nobody's going to consume 5 cups of quinoa a day. It looks good on a chronometer, as far as the micronutrients and the whole 9 yards, but you can't consume it. And so I designed a diet for Lane. It was just easier for him, mechanically speaking, to chew and swallow enough calories to gain weight. And so some of it just has to do with, just how easy is it to adhere to the program, and does it check all the other boxes in terms of calorie surplus, sufficient protein, low saturated fat, adequate micronutrient content, potassium being one of the main ones from, say, potato, fruit, yogurt. Those kinds of things. So we get all of what's required. We check all the boxes, but we understand that calories are king, and we drive that with foods that are a little easier to eat. Hence the monster mash, or I mix it with a little bone broth. And now it's just, mechanically speaking, it's just easier to slurp and consume all of that. More amylase production, more saliva from putting a little teeny bit of dextrose on your rice. It just makes it go down easier. digests faster, you're hungry again sooner, and you can do it again over and over again. So create a system that you can adhere to, becomes less of a grind, and then these plateaus don't seem so painful, I suppose I could say.
I like a few things that you said there. Number one, like it's going to take more time than you think if you actually want to gain like mostly muscle mass and not body fat. That's one of the biggest things people forget. It's like if you eat, you get freaking huge. You're going to get freaking huge, but maybe not in the way you want to. So you have to respect that things go slow. Make sure your training is progressing during that time too. One thing about fat is I believe that there's also some studies that say that if your omega-3 omega-6 ratio is not correct too, like you can actually have your metabolism slow down, and that's could also really contribute to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, because of other metabolic syndrome, etc. And then having a schedule and a system that is engineered for your success. If you're one of those people like myself that you're naturally kind of under eat, well, maybe incorporating some more calorie dense foods. Incorporating some of your principles of the vertical diet. So I think one of the really awesome things about that is that sometimes with weight gain diets, you'll see like they're great with getting calories in, but then they completely neglect like the health, or your digestion goes to hell. And if you don't feel good, you're not going to perform well. Whereas with lots of your foods, I've tried like the vertical diets. I have struggled with gastrointestinal issues my entire life since my eating disorder. It really helps me manage those symptoms with less gas, less bloating. I have more energy. My calorie intake gets higher. One of the things that's actually pretty common with recovered anorexics is metabolism tends to be higher. Yeah, I think it's like called overfeeding syndrome. And so for somebody like myself, incorporating those small things and making it easier for myself to adhere to that, having a strict schedule with food. Like if it's this time, I eat. It does not matter. It does not matter. Because like with hard gainers, like the main thing is like what you said. They'll like eat a massive meal and then they don't eat anything the rest of the day. They have like a protein bar. I eat so much, and like I'm like, number one, you're not tracking your food, so you don't know how much you're eating. That you measure it, it's managed, like what you say. Two, like how are you going to get in calorie surplus eating 4,000 plus calories per day if you're eating twice a day? Like you're going to feel like crap. It's going to be really hard to get that in, and you're probably going to have to resort to junk food. And like a calorie is not a calorie in terms of like performance, how it's going to make you feel. And buying those foods that make you feel good, that agree with your body, it's huge. It's super big.
Yeah, agree. Well, you hit on all the points there. So you've lived it. I think it's one of the things that we didn't discuss that's in my book. I talk about low FODMAP foods, FODMAP, fermentable oligodimonosaccharides and polyols. Monash University of Australia designed this diet to help people who have IBS to reduce the symptoms of painful gas and bloating. I lean into that diet for people who are bulking because those low FODMAP foods tend to be a little easier to digest. Some of it has to do with the type of food. Some of it has to do with the preparation of the food, whether or not you cook your vegetables till they're soft, make them easier to digest. That's not to say that that's a good food, bad food conversation. It's just that I lean into more of the lower FODMAP foods when people are trying to gain weight, because it doesn't fill them up as quickly or for as long, and maybe cause digestive distress. But I'm not diagnosing somebody as being IBS or suggesting they should completely avoid all of the higher FODMAP foods. There's certainly some good foods in there, but that's just something I lean into preferentially. So very important to be able to listen to your body. And you said another thing, the frequency with which you eat. I work with the U.S. Olympic women's wrestling team, and a couple of those athletes need to gain weight. They're underweight. And they had a problem with eating enough meals daily. They would say, "Oh, I'm not hungry." You need to eat on a time, and whether or not you're hungry doesn't matter. Just eat less. I don't care. Initially, let's train the body to eat every 4 hours. It will. You say the same thing to a dieter who's just grazing all day long. It's just you start teaching your body to eat at a certain time, it'll get used to that time, and you'll be hungry or not hungry when you're supposed to be, based on the schedule that you've created for your body. So eat on a schedule, and then as you're allowed, and as I did a rant, I think, called Training Your Metabolism, where Flex Wheeler was working with me back in 2008. And he said, he would tell me, eat these foods and then call me back when you're hungry. And so I would eat the foods that he assigned. Initially, it was hard to get it all in. And after about a week or 10 days, all of a sudden I was hungry. And I called him back and he said, okay, why don't you add an ounce of meat to each meal and a quarter cup of carbs, or half a cup here, half a cup there. And I did that and I was full. And 10 days later, from doing exactly that, I was hungry again. And so some of that's, as you just discussed, guys like us who tend to be pretty lean, we have this higher non-exercise activity thermogenesis. As we eat more calories, our energy expenditure increases, and it's a frustrating, endeavor to gain weight because our body just burns more calories when we eat more calories. So then we got to eat more calories to be in a surplus.
Yeah.
And it
And then you're
seems
not
never
hungry.
ending. The upside to that for us, which is actually kind of a double-edged sword, is that when we want to lose weight, we can lose weight like that. You and I could probably lose a pound a day and have to be cautious not to, because we just start eating up muscle. The problem that I found when I lost the 17 pounds, it came off pretty quickly. There's no question, just from a modest reduction in calories. But I got really, really hungry. And so let me tell you the difference between a weight gain diet and a weight loss diet. We talked a lot about a weight gain diet. The difference is when I'm trying to gain weight, I'll use ground beef. More surface area, easy to eat, chew, and swallow more of it to digest quicker. When I'm trying to lose weight, I'll use top sirloin steak. It's a little more laborious to cut and to chew, and then it's a bulkier in the stomach. It takes a little longer to digest. Stay full longer. When I'm trying to gain weight, I'm drinking OJ yogurt shakes. I'm down in orange juice with all of my yogurt, kind of as a vehicle to get more yogurt and OJ, which tends to raise your body temperature a little bit. The fructose can increase body temperature. And when I'm dieting, I'll eat an orange or blueberries or raspberries. Raspberries are really high in fiber as well, with my yogurt. And I might use a fattier yogurt when I'm gaining weight, maybe a 1% or a 2%. Interestingly enough, I talked about saturated fat. The fat in dairy, the milk fat globulin membrane doesn't raise LDL to the same degree as, say, butter, which has been churned and the membrane's been broken down. Dairy is cardioprotective. We see that in epidemiology and in RCTs as well, because the fat in dairy does not appear, and cheese, hard cheeses like cheddar, does not have the same impact on elevating LDL as would, say, a butter or a bacon fat, or even a coconut oil for that matter. So that's a distinction that I'll make. Another thing is when I'm trying to gain weight, I'll eat plenty of white rice and sprinkle a little dextrose on it again, just so I can eat a lot of it real fast. If I wanted to add 1,000 calories to somebody's diet, which isn't necessarily what I recommend, but I would just have them drink 8 ounces of milk with each meal and throw in 2 of those Bibigo rice bowls from Costco that take 90 seconds to heat up in the microwave, and sprinkle a teeny little bit of dextrose on them, not to drive calories, but just to make them easier to consume. There's 1,000 calories right there. Just add that to your foundation, which is your foundation is going to be a number of protein sources from red meat, dairy, eggs, salmon, and then your carbohydrates would be potassium-rich berries or juice. And then I would swap out the rice for gain weight, trying to lose weight, with potato. Potato is very satiating, as is an orange. There's a satiety index that measures how long certain foods keep people full. And potatoes, boiled potatoes in particular, presuming you don't put sour cream and butter on them, but boiled potatoes and oranges are way at the high of that list, up there higher than protein, as high as other fibers. And then when I'm losing weight, I'll throw a salad in there. When I'm gaining weight, I probably wouldn't eat as much high fiber vegetables. I would eat a higher fiber, higher calorie food such as berries in order to gain weight, or juice, orange juice, like I mentioned. But and then when I'm eating breads, I'll usually eat sourdough toast because my stomach can handle it better. It's fermented. That's one of the kind of the low FODMAP tricks to when I'm gaining weight. When I'm losing weight, I probably don't eat much bread, don't eat much white rice. Just swap that out for, say, fruits, maybe oatmeal, a little bit of oatmeal. Might also, it's good soluble fiber, etc. But it just keeps you full longer. But I generally eat fewer carbs in a weight cut than I would in a weight gain, obviously. But I keep protein pretty much the same, and fats pretty much the same. And fats generally for me are under 80 grams. I think you could go as low as 60 without having any compromise of hormone or sleep or fat-soluble vitamin absorption. I think that once you get kind of down below that, you start to compromise any of those three things.
There's tons of gold there with like the food spots, because like there's so many different things that contribute to satiety. Like you mentioned, the texture of the food volume, the fiber content, the preparation method. Adding like boiling potatoes, like it's going to be more filling than air frying it because you're adding water instead of dehydrating it. And so really just if you understand that, and if you have somebody guiding you who understands that, if you're having issues with weight gain or weight loss, you can make these very simple food swaps, and voila, it's significantly easier. So Stan, thank you so much for coming on and donating your time. Super awesome conversation. I learned a ton. People want to find you, hire you, maybe get your meal prep service. Where should they head?
Everything's at stanefferding.com. At stanefferding.com, you'll find a link to the Vertical Diet meal prep service where I send monster mashes to doorsteps nationwide. You'll find a link to my ebooks, the Vertical Diet 4.0, the latest release just came out a few months ago. This is something I originally released 7+ years ago as the 1.0 version. And it's progressed over the years to 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. Now it's 260 pages with over 200 references to videos, articles, and peer-reviewed research, and co-authored by Dr. Damon McCune as well. And any subsequent update is provided for free to anybody who brought a previous version. So it's kind of a living document. And I've also got on there a blood test link. If you need to get a blood test, we didn't talk a lot about that today, but all my athletes get blood tests. It really helps you kind of guide your general health and performance. That goes to Merrick Health, merrickhealth.com. I used to spend $350, $400, sometimes on almost a monthly basis throughout my competitive career, over 100 blood tests that I've had. Merrick Health's got a very comprehensive profile that they compiled for me. It's $144. It's very inexpensive for. You just go down to LabCorp, everything's done online. They email you a form, go get your blood drawn. And then within 3 to 4 days, they email you the results, and you'll have a lot of good information to work with. YouTube, Rhino's Rants is also Stan Efferding. I got a lot of fun stuff in there. And then Instagram is also Stan Efferding. So everything's under my name.
Awesome. I'll make sure all those things are included in the show notes for the listeners. But thank you guys so much for listening. Talk to you guys in the next episode.